take it away, Brendan and Roberto.
Awesome. Alrighty. Здравствуйте, товарищи. Добро пожаловать, Tsar Power. I'm Roberto.
And I'm Brendan, and together we're ranking the Russian rulers from Rurik to Putin. This week, Cannibal Island.
So,
They
yes,
can't. Can you guys hear us?
I
It's
can
saying we're
speak up
not
a bit
loud enough.
more. Okay. So, alrighty. So, Brendan, have you heard
Yes.
of the tragedy of Nazino? It's not a tale the Soviets would tell you.
Is it possible to learn this tale? Wait, no, that's not how it goes. Whatever. That joke didn't work.
Oh well, it's fine. Well, today we're going to talk about an event in the Soviet Union that doesn't really
Hmm.
get much of a voice elsewhere. You may hear it every once in a while, but it's very small, like 2 month period that happened. And it's known as the Nazino Tragedy, or in more popular media, as Cannibal Island. So, you know me and how much I like gory details, right? Well, we're going to skip all the gory details today because we're going to talk about all the events that led up to this labor camp, having loads of people starving and turning to cannibalism, because the journey there is way more important than what actually happened. So we start off with two master pies. No, we start off with two masterminds of this plan. The first guy is named Henry Yagoda, or Henry Berry, if you want to translate his name, and he's the head of the secret police, or the OGPU at the time. And then someone else named Matvey Berman, who is the head of the gulags. So we get secret police and gulags. How do you think this plan's going to go?
Like all things in Russian history, I expect a happy ending.
Absolutely. Well, their plan had a very simple solution. They decided that they needed to deport, quote, this is from Yagoda, all the elements polluting the socialist society currently being
Sorry,
constructed.
Yagoda, that's a place, a city?
So Yagoda is the head of the secret police.
Oh, okay. So it was like a letter from Yagoda saying this.
Yeah. So Yagoda
Okay.
saying all the elements polluting the socialist society currently being constructed, and end quote there. And he's going to ship them off to Western Siberia and Kazakhstan. So so Yagoda decided to target 6 different kinds of people to send off to the east. The first one, the kulaks, who had not yet been dekulakized in the course of the preceding years, because there's been a few other deportations of the
Hmm.
kulaks, and a kulak is a peasant in Russia who is wealthy enough to own a farm and hire labor. So essentially, if you're a rich farmer, you're being sent off to Siberia. The next up is second group is the peasants, those who had joined kolkhozes, which are collective farms, and they were charged with sabotaging the state's procurement plans and other political economic campaigns undertaken by the state. So essentially, these peasants are being charged with stealing supplies because they're being forced to give them all to the Soviet Union. The third one are the kulaks, who are hiding in firms and workplaces or escaping from the countryside. So basically, these rich peasants who are going into cities when they shouldn't be. The fourth group are the individuals expelled in the context of cleaning up the USSR's western frontiers. So anybody they didn't want in Western Russia, sent off to Siberia. The fifth group are the urban elements refusing to leave cities in the context of passportization. And passportization is basically a Soviet system where they're basically requiring people to have an internal and external passport. So the internal one acts as a residency permit and migration recording tool, and this lets the government keep track of who was where and ensuring that people in the city should be living where they're living. So basically, you need a passport to move in the country, a passport to move out of the country. Very Soviet. um, and then, of course, the final group are the individuals whom the courts and the secret police basically sentenced to a jail term of less than 5 years, with the exception of those elements particularly considered dangerous from a social point of view. So if you're an anarchist or anything, or the Soviets are like, you're not communist enough, you can be deported as well.
Would this also include criminals?
Yes.
What about drug addicts?
Yes.
Sex workers?
Anybody you can think of, Brendan. Anybody.
Jews?
Yes. If they
Yeah.
haven't been, kicked out already.
Yeah.
But, Matvey Berman is also Jewish, and he's head of the gulags. So, well, all these people would get the category of a kulak and then be deported as a labor colonist to Western Siberia and Kazakhstan. And Yagoda's main plan was to cleanse Moscow of all these people who are not connected to production or administrative work. So if you weren't a bureaucrat or weren't a factory worker, you don't belong in a city. And yeah. And many of these people being deported were just former merchants, traders, peasants escaping the famine, because guess what's happening in Russia? Food shortage!
And wasn't a reason for this food shortage the policy of collectivization?
Yes, you are correct.
So, and briefly, collectivization was when all food was consolidated and then redistributed, right?
Yes, and that is actually the second group of people being arrested, or the people taking from those food collectivization things, and they're being arrested for taking food away because they're starving. So, yeah, people escaping famine, send them in prison. It reminds me of that one meme where it's like, yeah, straight to jail, all these people. Then, of course, petty criminals and those who just didn't fit into the Soviet vision of the working class structure. So if the police were just like, you don't belong, straight to jail. And all of these people this group was further augmented because they would be denied residential passports allowing them to live in cities. And they were also indiscriminately arrested and deported with no due process, usually at the whim of the police who found them, mostly, in case in point, especially with my experience in Russia, if you do not pay a fine or a bribe, you get deported. So basically just showing the corruptness of the police. And because you got arrested and deported to a labor camp, you also lost your right as a citizen, your civil rights, and you'd be under house arrest in all these special villages that Yagoda was propping up and forcing you to live in and do intense labor to exploit the natural resources such as timber, mining, and farming in the Soviet Far East to build up the resources of the Soviet Union. So basically, they're forcing people just to do menial work to get resources that they really can't get from the Western Siberia because there's no one living there. So this plan originally was meant to make about 2 million people labor colonists, but 75% of those would work on the farms and forests of the Kazakhstan and Western Siberia, and expected to be fully sufficient within 2 years, and to have, quote, this is from Yagoda once more, to have freed the state from any expense for their support and begun producing merchandise that would allow the state to recover the expenses incurred in the operations of deportation and settlement of the contingents, end quote. So it's basically hard labor, get us materials, and the other 25% were expected to do all the farming, the fishing, the crafts, mining, in order to be able to feed themselves. So self-sufficiency and providing things for the Soviet Union. And then there was one big problem with this. 2 million people. What do you think would happen with 2 million people?
How do you feed these people? Also, what year was this happening?
This is in 1933.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is May 1933, before World War II.
Yeah, so this is prior to the entry of Russia into World War II. Okay.
Prior, yeah. So, yeah, so food is a big problem, but Western Siberia and Kazakhstan were pretty not well built up infrastructure-wise and very underpopulated. So, how do you move 2 million people from urban centers to rural centers easily?
Choo-choo train?
Choo-choo trains, yes. But here's the big thing. So Western Siberia and Kazakhstan didn't really have choo-choo trains everywhere. So Yagoda acknowledged that the transportation of people, equipment, construction, livestock, tools, food supplies, and everything necessary to ensure that the deportees survive their journey would rely on heavy usage on railroads and waterways to ensure their arrival. So luckily, they had boats. And if there's one thing we know about the Rus and just Russians in general, they like their river boats. Then another problem arose when Yagoda was like planning this out. The places that these people were being sent to were uninhabited, so they didn't have choo-choo trains going there because they didn't have the infrastructure set up. So that made it harder to get people to places.
Okay, quick question. Are they uninhabited in the same way that North America was uninhabited before settlers arrived there?
Well, there are locals living there who are, Central Asian and Eastern Asian who live in the area, but they get forgotten about in the Soviet plans, and they really don't come up in this whole episode because they're kind of further away from everything. But they're being part of the Russification of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I'm guessing that our sources for this are Soviet records, right? Ultimately.
Soviet records and a book by Nicholas Wirth called Cannibal Island.
Right, and his sources were probably Soviet records and interviews,
exactly,
right?
Yes.
So I doubt Soviet records would probably include the perspective of the native Siberians.
Yes. They did not care that much. Well, okay, so how do you move people to overland when you don't have any railways?
Death marches?
Well, that is one way to do it, but luckily the Soviets are more advanced than that, Brendan. They're not horrible people. They had thousands of trucks moving about 3 metric tons of people and supplies every day for 250 kilometers round trip daily. Well, or they planned for that, but that's a lot of trucks and oil to spend on deportees who don't do anything.
Roads.
No, it's off-road driving, okay. But they would need these trucks, but they're not going to use the trucks. It's the Soviet Union. We don't have time for that. But they also needed 90,000 horses to do all the farm work, transportation, and have thousands of tractors available for work and transport. Basically, Yagoda needs a lot of materials to get this whole thing started, and to move that many people would be very expensive, and he would need the help of other ministries of the USSR to deal with everything. And this would come close to about 1.4 million rubles at the time, which is very expensive. In today's money, that is still kind of expensive, but not as much. But it's very expensive, and I couldn't really transfer the currency because looking up Soviet ruble to USD does not help. But basically, a very expensive endeavor and a very hefty sum. And you mentioned this earlier, and let's not forget that there are reports from Ukraine, the North Caucasus, the Volga, Western Siberia, and Kazakhstan of problems with the food supply. Apparently, things aren't growing well, and people are starving. And all the signs are pointing towards a famine that would impact the Soviet Union, especially in Ukraine. Have you ever heard of the Holodomor?
It rings a bell.
Yeah, basically, a lot of Ukrainians died from starvation, and the USSR was fine with it.
Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah. Well, this severely impacted the total number of people that could be sent out east. So instead of sending out 2 million people, they dropped down the total to 1 million people. That's a lot better, don't you think?
So that other million deportees just stayed in jail wherever they were?
Yeah, they stayed in jail. May have been executed on the spot. Who knows? Soviet records don't keep track of people once they're gone.
That makes sense, I guess.
You just know they got arrested, and then you lose track of them forever. It's okay. Well, the plan was approved, and then work began on building up the camps, which were scheduled to be completed by Labor Day, or May 1st, because that's when Labor Day should be.
Yeah, real Labor Day.
Yeah, exactly. Then then disaster struck. The secret police got a bit too good at their jobs and began arresting and deporting people way ahead of schedule for just about any reason. Didn't matter what they were doing. Different local sectors had quotas, and darn it, they would fill those quotas and supersede them. Basically go over those quotas. So arrest anyone for anything, and you'll be a good policeman.
Yeah. Like a good Soviet, they even bureaucratized the justice system.
Oh yes. Would you like to hear about 4 reports of those who got arrested?
Sure.
Okay, so report number 1. This is Maria Lavrikova, age 35. She was a waitress in the River Hotel in Sochi, and according to her statements, her husband is a battalion commander in the Amur province, and he holds 2 red flag decorations. She was deported with her father, age 71, her mother, age 70, and a brother, age 22. Reasons unknown. Um, Person number 2, N. Kavadegia, age 45, and she was deported from Sochi without reason. Her husband is a party member, card number 1646240. At the time of roundup, she was carrying out a mission for the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Georgia.
And
That's it. That's all they wrote.
Okay.
Person number 3, Vera Mirochnichenko, party member, card number 1471366. Rounded up and deported when she went to get things from the apartment of her ex-husband, who was about to be deported as a D-class element. Despite her protest, Mirochnichenko was put on the convoy along with her ex-husband and was not authorized to return to her home in order to prove her identity and her membership in the party.
Wow. It seems like being a member of the party is kind of an occupational hazard.
It can be if you don't have your card on you. And then what I thought was the saddest one, and the last one, Yevgenia Markovkina, age 18, deported from Tuapse with her sister, 17, and her 2 brothers, 13 and 5, because her father, who died in 1931, about 2 years prior, had been a shady operator in the past. The 5-year-old died en route. Since no one was authorized to leave the convoy, the boy's body was thrown out the window.
Wow.
Yeah, they just arrested people for anything. And these are just some of the indiscriminate arrests made by police. There are cases of people who were just too old and sickly to actually move, and they were just arrested, sent straight to prison. And as I mentioned, the one that hit me the most was the arrested children, because literally between 5 and 18, they've done nothing, but because their dad was a shady operator, according to the Soviet Union, just sent to prison, and the 5-year-old died. Like, what the heck? But the most surprising one was that of Mirochnichenko, who was the party member, because you'd think that the party member would actually be the one given leeway and be able to like walk away and do different things, but no. And it's even noted by Nicholas Worth in the book that Yagoda actually wrote a question mark, exclamation mark right next to this, as of kind of going like, what the heck? And then he did nothing to resolve it. Just let it happen. Didn't even try to get her back out or anything. So it's just like, well, she's in prison, can't do anything, got to meet quotas.
Yeah, I was going to make a joke about, well, the history of communism is the history of a circular firing squad. But it's just like in a bureaucratized society, human beings become numbers. They become expendable.
Exactly. And it's just, you can just tell they're just trying to fill a quota, and they're like, well, even if, they're related to people who are in our thing, in our party, well, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the secret police doesn't care. They're just going to do their job. Well, that's basically about some of the people who got deported. So who wants to learn about the camps? Because it's April 1933. Yes, Brendan. And you'd expect, they're getting all these deportees ready to be sent out, and they're already arresting them. But how do you think progress has been going on in the labor camp?
I'm guessing that considering that they don't even have roads, that it's probably not going well.
Well, how about nothing has happened?
Oh, they just did nothing?
They just did nothing. But you see the deportees.
I'm guessing that the officers were selling the construction supplies on the back.
Oh, come on. It's the Soviet Union. Of course they were.
Yeah.
Well, nothing has been made ready at the camp, but on the river, you can see deportees on river barges, and you can see them on trains heading to the transit camp at Tomsk, Omsk, and Achinsk, which is pretty close to like Novosibirsk and Irkutsk in Siberia. And Tomsk was the largest of these camps, which is north of Novosibirsk, and was able to hold 15,000 deportees when at full capacity.
These
That
these were barges.
This is just a transit camp.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, so basically just a place to hold people until they can get them to the next location. So they can hold up to 15,000 people at once. That April, the first train arrived with 25,000 people. And that's just the first of the trains. Because over the course of the month, trains and barges kept arriving, and between all three of them, they were overflowing with about 60,000 people. So how do you think what do you think would happen with this many people in a small enough camp with minimal supplies?
Well, I think if there's anything we learn from the immortal science of proletarian botany, invented by the great botanist Lysenko, they would actually try to help each other rather than starve. And in fact, they would sacrifice themselves so that other people would not starve. And they wouldn't
Well,
fight over food.
no, yeah, they're going to be very nice to each other, actually. Well, before we go into what they would do to each other, really bad news arrived because Moscow and Leningrad would be sending their own underclass deportees. So they decided to empty out the prisons and send their criminals to the labor camps. And these were all and basically all the non-criminals and criminals combined, and the criminals did what they do best, and they stole and beat the non-criminals and took whatever little food and clothing they had. So essentially the criminals began to run the place.
Oh, so it's just like when street gang or it's when prison gangs form.
Yeah. So but once these underclass deportees arrived to Tomsk, the guards decided that after seeing all this violence, that these urban deportees should be placed in the most isolated work sites because who wants to deal with them, you know? So, and
So it was like
that's
getting
what,
sent to Alcatraz, basically.
yes, but in this case, we call it Nazino. Um, so we go to Nazino,
Sorry, and
and
this was whose policy directive was this that said we should deport all of these prisoners to the camp?
well, this is still under Yagoda's plan, and the guards are just kind of doing what they want.
Okay, so Yargada is still running the show.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, with the camps being overflowing now, the deportees were moved to Nazino Island because that is a very isolated work site for them, which is located on the Ob River about 500 miles north of Tomsk. So they were loaded up on river barges because, there's no roads to get there, and they were sent upriver to their location. But because they had so many people, the guards forgot to put one thing in the boats. Can you guess what that was?
Um, one thing in the boats. Was it the cork at the bottom of the boat that keeps water from seeping in and keeps it from sinking?
You'd wish there would have been a lot less death that way, but they forgot to load up the food and supplies.
I'm gonna say we put big quotations around forgot.
You can, but of course, there was still some food. They were able to give out 7 ounces of bread per person per day on the way there. So you had 7 ounces of bread to eat, Brendan, a day.
Okay. Is this Beria's fault in any way?
No, this is Yagoda. Beria
Okay.
comes in a bit after this. Um, yeah. So the barges also contained about 9 pounds of flour per person, but had no other food, cooking utensils, or tools. So they had nothing to cook the food with either. So they arrived on this swampy island of Nazino. There's bugs everywhere. It's spring, so everything's starting to smell up, and it's a swamp. It's horrible. And none of the people who went there were marked down, so we don't know who was there or not. But they did do a head count, and we see about 322 women were there, and about 4,556 men were on the island, along with 27 bodies that had perished on the way up the river. So One third of these deportees are actually too weak to even stand up because when you've been eating 7 ounces of bread a day, you get kind of weak if you're not getting your right nutrients. And soon enough, 1,200 more people were added to Nazino. So, and these were all the underclass deportees that the guards sent up from Tomsk because they didn't want to deal with these people. So they just added all these criminal elements into the island. And mayhem began to break loose not too long after this. Because as distribution of the flour started happening, like, all right, here's your food, get your stuff, it'll be fine. A fight broke out between the deportees and the guards, and the guards began to fire on the deportees. And then they decided, well, they're being kind of bad, so let's move the flour to the other side of the bank and then just ship in things as needed. And when they started to distribute again, they started fighting once more. So the guards were like, well, screw it. We're not going to hand out food unless you absolutely need it. Then they got this really cool idea. Why don't we have brigades? So we get one person to come over to the other side of the bank, pick up food, and distribute it to their group. So they got brigades, and they were led by a brigadier. Now, who do you think the brigadiers were led by most of the time?
Sorry, these brigadiers were soldiers or they were prisoners?
They were prisoners. They were just running the brigade of people. Okay. Basically, they had their own group of people they were running.
So I'm guessing it's prison rules. So, you go up to the biggest, strongest guy on the first day and you make him brigadier.
Yeah. So, and can you guess it? The people who are most in charge are the most violent ones. So the criminals began to be made the brigadiers, and they immediately began to abuse their privileges and ended up eating the rations meant for everyone themselves. And yeah, so people were starting to go hungry. And those who could get flour, well, they didn't have ovens to cook it with. So when you only have a swamp and a river and you have flour, they decided, well, the only thing we can do is to mix flour with water, and the only water source you have is river water. So they got dysentery. So it's not a great time. So the prisoners
ignore the truck in the background, everyone.
That's a normal thing. I live in a small town. Well, the prisoners were beginning to see the ruinous situation and their tiny chance of survival, and they began to build rafts to escape. But the rafts began to break along the river because these rafts are rather primitive, and they didn't have good supplies to actually make good boats. And so when all these groups of prisoners would escape, the corpses would begin to wash up on Nazino's banks and be in full view of the remaining settlers. So you had decomposing bodies right next to you. You had no food. You have no shelter.
In the water that you're drinking are decomposing bodies.
Exactly.
And probably also everyone is urinating and defecating in that water.
Yeah, because there's literally no hygiene in the area. So they built up nothing. They were not ready for this. And the guards themselves would begin to grow bored. They had their supplies, they had food, but they noticed, if people are escaping and we're bored, we have guns. Why don't we hunt them down like they're animals? So anybody who would escape from the camp, they would just hunt down and shoot like they were, wild animal.
I was assuming that they were just gonna use the rafties as target practice.
That's some people those are some of the people that would shoot too. Mm-hmm. So because they're escaping. So anybody who was escaping, they'd hunt down, shoot, and just put the body
or hunt the most dangerous game.
Yeah. Well, and of course, if you did manage to escape from both the guards and survive the Ulb River, the harsh conditions of the taiga would ensure that you were unable to survive in the area because guess what? It's a taiga. There's not much going around. So it'd be hard for you to find food or anything.
Yeah, and I assume, this is the Siberian winter.
It's April. It's like May now, so it's like it's still May. Spring, but it's still cold. Because summer doesn't last that long in Siberia.
Right. So how were people's clothes? Were they fortified against this Siberian spring?
They barely have food. Do you think they have clothes?
I mean, if you live in Russia, you dress warm as a matter of course.
They were not prepared at all. They were, out in the elements. They were, it was warm enough to like survive, but it was still cold enough where you weren't like dying. But then news arrived from Moscow. Stalin had looked over this plan finally, and decided it needed to be shut down.
Really?
Yeah,
Stalin made a good decision. Stalin decided this was a bad idea.
he decided this was a bad idea because he much preferred the Gulag system.
Oh, yeah, fair enough.
But of course, because there was no infrastructure in the area, it would take a few months. It would take a few weeks for this people here to find out um, what was going on. And yes, the guards had food and supplies for themselves. Of course, the guards would be fine. But we then get reports that any and all order on the island broke down almost immediately, because there's no infrastructure, and the deportees themselves, because they're from the city, didn't know how to work or till the land, so they didn't even know how to like build up stuff or anything. And the scarcity of resources just even around them would have the deportees form gangs and push them to fight like, amongst each other instead of working together to ensure everyone's survival. It didn't help the criminals were just out for themselves. So people were murdered, as tends to happen when you have a bunch of criminal elements who want to run the place and get their way. And any gold that people had in their body, such as like tooth fillings or just any hidden jewelry, they were looted and used as currency with other gangs to get like cigarettes or like tobacco. And then this wasn't all, because the guards would extort the citizens and execute them for any minor offense. So basically, if the deportee did anything wrong, shot. Anything, shot. And the lack of food of Nazino, along with all the deaths from the violence, led to the first reports of cannibalism. But of course, you wouldn't go to jail in the Soviet Union for eating a dead body. That's not against the law. Now, what
Yeah,
was
that's
against
just efficient use of your resources.
exactly? There's no law in the Soviet Union that says you cannot eat dead people. Now, there is a law though that says you cannot kill people to eat them. And you got reports.
Also, there's nothing in the rule book that says a dog can't play basketball.
Airbud. Well, we then get reports from the doctors in Nazino that showcase that people were actually now being murdered for consumption because there was no other food. And over the next month, once the guards came in from outside Nazino, about 50 people were arrested for cannibalism. So we had 50 cannibals on the island. But we had about 7,200 people coming in and only 50 cannibals. So Cannibal Island is kind of a bit of a misnomer.
I feel like that has to be a low ball.
Do you really think? I mean, those are only the confirmed cases.
Confirmed according to the Soviet Union.
Exactly. But Stalin's orders finally did arrive, and the island camp was finally destroyed. And out of the 7,200 people who were settled there, how many do you think survived?
7,200.
Yeah.
I give them a 30% survival rate.
Well, I'm not going to do the math, but we had about 2,900 survivors left at the end of it, roughly. Less than that.
That's less than half. Yeah.
Yeah. But they were moved to smaller settlements north. But of course, 700 more of the deportees died during the transfer, and they found themselves in a similar situation with few tools and food in their new labor camps. So, yeah, things just didn't get any better for them, even though the whole thing was shut down. They were still struggling to survive. We still don't even know who's where anymore, so we lost all about the people who were there. And then reports from the island showcased that there was no shelter on the island, and people were constantly exposed to the elements. And the events on the island highlighted the issues with the efforts to colonize the Siberian front through deportations, leading to the disappearance of about 370,000 people from the urban areas to the rural areas. So we lost track of almost over 250,000 people. The Nazino tragedy had a very positive effect, though, and it stopped the use of deportees from urban class elements and criminal backgrounds. So we were no longer sending criminals to the Western Siberian front, and we would send people knowledgeable for colonization into these regions from now on. And that is all from us.
All right. 5 minutes. Any questions? Do you really want the kind of prize that comes from Soviet history? I think the Order of Lenin probably comes with a lot of perks. Or what is it called? The Lenin Medal? Order of Lenin.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean Yuri Gagarin got a Order of Lenin medal.
There we go. Whatever. If Yuri Gagarin got
He's a
it,
good guy.
Yeah. Hopefully, we'll cover him eventually.
Yeah, probably. If anyone want to suffer the fate, it should have considered not being revisionist counter-revolutionaries. That's a fair point. You would have made a great communist. Compare this to making Olga of Kiev for a movie. Well, Olga is a good character. It's a good revenge story. I can see this as more like a survival horror, maybe.
Like a really bad B movie survivor horror.
Maybe. I mean, when I imagine this, I imagine like a 90s Russian movie. Yeah, V style, like lots of film grain, lots of like sepia tones.
The 1967 version, of course.
Yeah, the 1967 version of V, dear God, please. Yeah. I think we could easily cast this. Anybody have any ideas for fan cast of Cannibal Island?
Tim Roth is Yagoda.
Tim Roth is Yargada.
Yeah.
Who does Steve Buscemi play?
He plays Matvey Berman.
Matvey Berman. Okay. What about some generic tough guy? I think Tom Hardy would make like a good gang leader.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, cool. Any other questions?
It can be about anything on this topic or just Tsar Power in general.
Yeah, I'll take
Georgia.
questions about Olga if you missed that. Anyone? Okay. Well, let's keep fan casting Cannibal Island. Who's the best director for this? Who's
Quentin Tarantino.
Quentin Tarantino? He's a good director for things falling completely apart on purpose. What about people who make good and then chaos ensues movies? Danny Boyle. He makes good chaos ensues movies.
Asha makes a good point. Okay. But yeah, no, I do want to thank you all for attending our presentation. It was really nice being able to have you all here, answer your questions, and just kind of talk about this topic. I've been interested in this topic for a bit since I heard about it a while back. And I thought, I got Brendan, basically my whole promo idea for this was just Cannibal Holocaust, and which I was supposed to watch with Brendan but didn't, but he watched it and he hated it. So
I watched that movie a long time ago. I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with the plot of the theoretical Cannibal Island movie. But anyway,
well,
go
thank
on.
you both so much for this talk. It's been very good, very interesting.
Thank you.
Horrifying in another way, but
And you can get more of this if you listen to the podcast. But that's Russian history.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you everyone for attending. Yes, enjoy the rest of the conference. I'm gonna
thank you guys.
Now.
Okay, bye everybody. Thank you for coming.
Bye.